Well, they're real spiders. So, and it's strange. I've had lots of conversation about the spiders, and I cannot tell you, when you're doing a big scene like that, you've got a lot to say. Dumping spiders on your face is such a secondary concern. It really is.
I believe that is untrue.
It is our delusion that lead us to sin. Delusions!
Your characters, both of you, they're just so weird. I just, like, from the second they came on the screen, I was like, what is happening here? So Harry, I just wanted to ask you firstly, the thing with the spiders, I'm assuming that was CGI, but what was it like filming that? Like, how did you kind of approach that scene? Because that's so creepy.
Well, they're real spiders. So, and it's strange. I've had lots of conversation about the spiders, and I cannot tell you, when you're doing a big scene like that, you've got a lot to say. Dumping spiders on your face is such a secondary concern. It really is. You really want to get the scene right. You know, you've seen lots of archive footage of, you know, what these events are like, and they're electric. You know, they're really full of energy. And so that was my main concern, making sure that room felt alive in that way. And to be honest, dumping some spiders that apparently do not bite, so I was told, was a real secondary thought.
How did you approach kind of getting that tone right? Because obviously it's very different to being in the room for that kind of experience, to having to kind of convey that across a screen. So how did you approach doing that?
Well, what was great was Antonio wanted to do it as one take, which really helped me, because it meant that I could really sort of, you know, ramp up into it. And I think that's what often happens from what I've seen anyway, that's what often happens in those at those events. There's a real sort of climax at the end of it. And so doing it in one take helped me sort of get there. And I mean, yes, there is a difference in terms of, you know, it being a live performance and film, but I still had to make the congregation feel something, feel alive, feel sort of. So in that regard, I'm not sure exactly what the differences were, but it was a fun scene to shoot for sure.
The first kind of question it was something that I was thinking about for your character, the kind of span of his journey in the film is, you see the scene where he discovers his platoon mate on the cross and he kills him to put him out of his misery. And I just wondered, is that something that you think bothered the character throughout? Or is that something that he kind of was okay with? It was really something a question that stuck with me.
No, I think that it absolutely bothered him. I think it's sort of, that scene is, you know, it embodies the whole experience that he had in the war, really, and it's kind of the root to his trauma and experience from it. Obviously, you can't cover, you know, his whole tour there, so you have this one scene, and then of course the symbolism of this man on a cross is where Willard, who probably grew up very Christian, loses his faith in that moment. Faith in God, but also maybe his faith in life itself. So it's a pivotal moment for him, and it's kind of it symbolizes his whole trauma from that experience, and of course he finds his faith again and tries to kind of you know, rebuild some sort of life in meeting Charlotte, who he later marries and starts a family with, and then that is kind of something that inspires him to find faith again. Now, I'm saying using faith as a tool to protect the thing that he cares about the most, which is his family.
In the character, I also felt like it's such an interesting relationship with his son, with Arvin, because I think the narrator says that the day in the car where Willard beats up those guys is the best day of his life. And I feel like that's quite a bonding moment for those two characters, but it was so interesting to me to see it so rooted in violence, right? When you've got this character whose whole life is defined by violence, to make that choice was such a kind of powerful moment. Was that when you kind of approached the character, were all of these things already in your head as the character moves through time?
Yeah, I mean, I always loved that it's pretty much exactly the way in the book as well. Don Pollock wrote, and he's actually the narrator of the film.
Yeah, I saw in the credits. Yeah.
That's very cool. But it always stuck to me. It stuck with me as well. This scene of brutal violence, really, and Arvin looks back at it as the sort of the best the fondest memory that he has of his father is for sure complicated, right?
The kind of arc that the character has, I felt very uneasy about him from the beginning. And so when what happens, I won't kind of go into too many spoilers. I wasn't sure how much of that was the true kind of belief in that God would give him this power. Did you have any feelings about that, or was that just kind of really clear in the script that yes, he's doing this because he believes he can really do this?
I guess my instinct with it was this guy is extremely lost when he feels he is not connected to God. And so I think he would do anything to get that connection back. So that's kind of what I took from it. But I understand that it's a very extreme thing to do. But I kind of thought it has to be that. Otherwise, you go into a real rabbit hole of what other reasons he's doing it for. But I think it is to sort of, get to the Holy Spirit, or whatever you want to call it.
I think what's so interesting is that after that happens, Pokey, your character's like lays it out real flat, like, no, like there's no explaining your way out of this. He's kind of, despite that you're both kind of in it together, he feels like the foil in that moment. And then when your last scene, I was like, what happens? I want to know what happens next. What was that like for you in terms of kind of ending on that ambiguous note?
Yeah, that was one of my last scenes. Well, it was very emotional. Some things you don't see, but yeah, having to, his world, that's it. That's the only thing he has left, and it's gone. It was very, very emotional to play into that and really feel that. It was very, very sad. But conversely with Theodore, he gave up on God a long time ago, right? His only hope is Roy. I mean, he has no use of his legs because he drank strychnine testing his faith. He's just like, oh, here we go, Roy. But he loves him. He'll follow him and go with anything he wants to do.
Absolutely. It's definitely some of the creepier elements, I think, come out from these two characters, and it really helps set the tone, I think, for the whole film. So I absolutely loved it. When I watched the movie last night, the thing that I took away, I think, from it most of all was how much it reminded me of like a Greek tragedy, in the sense that you've got all these characters who are kind of working against their fates and yet are victims of them despite every single choice they make in opposition. Was that something that you really felt when you were looking at the book and then when you had adapted it for the film, or was that like a happy consequence of the way that the story is?
It's interesting. I never thought about a Greek tragedy as a reference, but it does have that element, especially it's also, generational, which is also part of so much part of Greek tragedies. No, I mean, the book just had this kind of generational story about the things that we pass on from one generation to the other, and specifically our relationship with faith and our trauma, and how does the next generation process that, and do they break the cycle or do they continue it? And so that was just kind of ingrained into the story. And then on top of that, you had this bigger narrative that was, that was suggesting that there was some bigger design to the whole thing, that there's some reason that things play out the way they do. But at the same time, the book doesn't really show God, and that's what I always thought was interesting, was a movie that was dealing with religion without but in a very human way. It was like very earthly, and so that's why I really responded to it?
I was lucky enough to shoot pretty much like all of my scenes consecutively. So it was scheduled this way that ironically it was at the very end of the production. So it was the last 2 weeks of the production, and it's the beginning of the movie. But that was very helpful in finding where Willard is in any given moment, and how he changes and what he goes through, and when does he become, when does he become more desperate, and in becoming more desperate, more manic, and potentially more dangerous as well for Arvin. It's funny because like there's so much to cover in only like the first 20 minutes of the movie. It's like this entire life story, but it happened so fast in the movie, but it felt a lot slower when you were like living through it in the character.
The book has just got so many juicy, wonderful things in it. We just had to be ruthless and not be too precious. It was like, okay, my brother and I sat down and we were like, what is this story about? And really kind of hit the essence of it. And like, we knew where he needed to start a story and end a story. And then, the book covers a lot of ground with the serial killers, for example, but we couldn't do all the scenes that Don does with the serial killers. We had to choose a scene that captured the essence of them and really kind of conveyed the bigger narrative, and then also like allowed the movie to kind of tease little things out so that you kind of were always kind of engaged with like the bigger narrative as well as the storyline that you're in. So it was tricky, but we had to just kind of like be ruthless with what we wanted to take and find the essence of every storyline.
I was left really curious about about Theodore at the end in the car on his own. That I think was the one thing for me that I really was like, oh, what happens there? Did you purposefully leave that ambiguous?
Well, we originally Theodore was supposed to die, and I mean everybody. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but a lot of people die in the movie. But we felt like ultimately the most tragic end for Theodore would be not having Roy in his life, his partner, and for him to be stuck in that car without a way of getting his wheelchair. It was very tragic. So it just felt like the most poetic end for that character.
Just one quick question: is there any room for a sequel? Because we are left a bit ambiguous with Arvin at the end.
I would love to create a Knock 'em Stiff universe and keep visiting that world in different eras.